What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to, what is it, the 4th episode of building Bobby's STI. If you haven't been following along, this is what we've got done so far. Full ETS front mount intercooler kit, ETS rotated turbo kit with a Precision 5858, ETS manifold, and an ETS catback. There isn't a ton of stuff that we can do on this car until some more parts show up. We do have an IAG competition series AOS, so we need to get that on and situated, figure out how everything with that works. I have a feeling we're gonna have to run to the parts store and grab some hoses and fittings and whatnot to run this thing exactly how we want it to run. We cannot mount it in the location that we're supposed to mount it in. The brackets they include mount it right where our turbo is, so we cannot mount it there. I'm kind of thinking somewhere in this general area, right back there on the firewall would be ideal. So that is the first thing I want to get situated today, is the AOS. Let's get this thing opened up. Bobby already actually opened it up. She got a little too excited when some parts showed up, so it's already opened up and kind of torn apart. So we have a bunch of hoses, some clamps, more clamps, elbow, and some other fittings, the actual AOS itself, some heat sleeves, and more hose and zip ties. The first thing I want to do is figure out where and how we are going to get this guy mounted up. So they do have, where'd that bracket go? This little bracket right here that we may be able to kind of modify and use. So it bolts to the back of the AOS like that. Let's get the carb down a little bit and figure out where the heck this thing's going to sit. All right, I think I found the perfect solution. This bracket we bent a little bit like that. 1/2-inch spacer we had laying around, got the bracket bolted onto the back of the AOS. Everything's set up here, good to go. Where we are mounting it is, there's a ground strap that runs from the trans up to the firewall right there. That right there is where we are mounting the AOS. And that bracket's gonna sit or slip behind the AC line here. Both on there, obviously get the ground back on. And I think that's gonna be the perfect spot. Let's get it mounted up, make sure everything is gonna clear. We set on the intake manifold with the TGV deletes just to make sure it's gonna clear everything. I gotta make sure it's gonna clear the intercooler piping as well. And then from there, we should be able to get everything plumbed and sitting how it should. All right, that is the final spot, final location. It clears the wastegate by quite a bit. It is touching this plastic up here, but I think we should be fine. And then that's how that bracket or the mount looks. So this giant port up top, this 1-inch port, is going to connect to the 1-inch hose and run underneath the car. This port is going to run to the driver's side valve cover. This port right here will run to the passenger side valve cover. Bottom port here is going to run to our block breather right there. So we'll need to install this Y, and she's going to sit down on there. Of course, we need to clamp it, but that's how that will sit. So this top on the Y right here is going to run to there. Then the side smaller port right here will run to that port on the bottom of the AOS there. There were the 2 coolant lines that we removed. So one is going to run back down to the head where the factory turbo drain would go. And then the other one is going to run to that port right there that runs down to the water pump. So we need to extend those hoses, I'm sure. That's what I was talking about earlier when I said we may need to run to the parts store. I think that's how everything's situated, 99.9% sure. There is one thing that I'm not 100% sure on, and it is the PCV sensors. These things are kind of weird. I know the older STIs don't have them. These newer ones do. I'm not sure if they're 100% necessary or if we can just like delete them and code them out, because obviously we're not going to be running half of them with this setup. So these are the sensors I'm talking about, and as you can see, they're connected to all the wiring and whatnot. So I need to figure that out. We can deal with that later on. For now, let's get all these hoses ran to where they need to go. I think that's a clean setup. I like how it's sitting. I think it's going to look really nice. Okay, so here's how everything is set up. Of course, it all needs to be cleaned up. Top port on AOS runs over to driver's side. Front port on the valve cover. Middle port runs to the passenger side. Front port The third port on the AOS, this bigger 5/8 here, runs to the top of that Y fitting, and then that side of the Y fitting runs to the drain. The two coolant ports on the bottom, one is gonna run over to our water pump. It looks like that hose should be just long enough. Then the other one that's gonna run down to the head, we need to extend that. We could run it in between the up pipe and the down pipe, but I know it's gonna get very, very hot in between there. So I'm electing to extend it a little bit just to be safe. We don't want to burn that. Then we have this giant 1-inch drain that runs underneath the car. Like I said, everything still needs to be cleaned up, but that's the general gist of how everything is going to be ran. This is of course quite a bit different than how you'd set it up with a stock turbo car or a turbo that has coolant going through it. But with this Precision, no coolant going through it, that is how we're running it. And if you haven't been following along the previous episodes, we are deleting that factory turbo coolant tank that sits right about here. We are not running that, so that's how everything's gonna be set up. I'm gonna do a little bit of modifications. It's really gonna clean up the bay. So that factory breather system that runs from the rear ports on the valve cover to the center port on the block, I took all that off. It's a hard line. It's kind of ugly in the way. So we just need to build a little T system. It's gonna run rear port on the passenger side, teed in to that breather, and that also will run to that rear port on the driver's side valve cover. So that is how that is all set up. I need to run in, grab some hose, grab some fittings. We need to extend that line over there and then get everything built for that center port breather. So here is what we picked up: 6 feet of 5/8 hose, a T for that hose, which is also 5/8, and then this 1/2-inch barb to extend that coolant line. Let's get all this situated. Now, of course, everything's gonna kind of be pushed around when we go to install the intake manifold. We kind of have to work around the intake manifold, but the main goal here is keeping all of these like nice and straight and clean, which I think is gonna be very, very doable. Let's see what we can do. Okay, we got that one T set up all finished up. I know it's looking extremely messy now, but I figured I'd show you guys this. If you pull this top fitting off, this is the 1-inch that runs underneath the car. They have the AOS threaded to where you can mount this thing at any position you want, which is gonna help tremendously with keeping this engine bay clean. So I think I'm gonna point it probably a little something like that, and it's gonna go right out the bottom of the car and not have to run in front and then go out the bottom. So that should help out quite a bit with keeping this bay nice and clean. All right, from here we are going to move on and get the intake, the TGV deletes, the fuel rails, the injectors, that whole assembly back onto the car. So we kind of need to get the intake manifold reassembled with the TGV delete housings, injectors, and the rails. It's gonna be much easier to do while it's out of the car versus trying to get the injectors and the rails in when the manifold's already on the car. So let me show you guys what we are going to be running for injectors and the rails. Super excited for this. We have used a few of the DW products in the past, and I'm excited to announce they are officially a new sponsor of the channel. So you guys will definitely be seeing a lot more DWorks products on the channel from here on out. So in here are the injectors. They should be a set of 1500s, which should be plenty for what we are going for. Initially, we were going to get a set of 1000 cc's, and then we decided on going with the flex fuel setup so we can run E85. So stepped it up to some 1500s. These things should be plenty for the setup. Remember guys, it's only a 5858. It ain't no 6.2 or 6.4, 6.6 like we were on the Evos. So yeah, 1500s with the necessary pigtail adapters, and then these are the DW fuel rails. These guys should look pretty beautiful and provide a lot more fuel going to these injectors. This here is the full setup that we're going to be running. The 1500s, we have a regulator in here, regulator gauge, the DW 440 brushless fuel pump, and then the fuel rails themselves. And it looks like they sent us some goodies. They sent us a lot of goodies. These things are sick. Some injector air fresheners, injector little jet tag or keychain, stickers, some hats, and it looks like some shirts as well. All right, let's get some parts installed onto the manifold. All right, the intake manifold's pretty much assembled. There was one thing we had to do real quick. So this guy right here, that's for the factory PCV system. We're gonna be pulling that out and replacing it with this plug because that will go to nowhere now that we're running the IAG AOS. We're gonna clean up the gasket surfaces for the intake manifold and we can actually get this intake manifold on the car. So here's a general idea of how the setup is going to look. I don't want to completely button it up because we still need our fuel lines. These are -6 rails, so obviously we cannot connect those to the factory hard line that runs underneath the intake manifold. So as soon as that fuel line kit shows up, we can get all that installed along with the fuel pressure regulator because all that kind of goes together, and along with the flex fuel kit. Overall, that's how it's gonna look. Nice, simple, clean, nothing crazy going on. The DW rails looking nice and shiny. We have the ETS hard pipe on that runs up to the turbo, and this side is gonna connect down to the intercooler pipe down there. As always, any of these Beachworks products that we are installing right now, I'll have them linked down in the description box below. Next up, I'm gonna go ahead and throw on the Grimspeed 3-port, and after that, there's not a whole lot we can do until the fuel lines show up, and then as soon as those fuel lines show up, we can pretty much button up the build and go ahead and attempt the first start, which is super exciting. I don't want to mount this in the same location that the factory one is mounted, which is right about there. I kind of want it somewhere else that's a little bit more hidden out of the way. I really like that bare manifold look with not a lot of stuff on it. So let's figure out where we're going to mount this thing. And then we need to figure out which line runs where, because we have compressor housing, and then we're going to have the top port and the side port on the wastegate. So I found my mounting location. It's up near the turbo. So that is actually where the factory front O2 sensor little clip is. So I pulled that clip out, got it bolted on, all good to go there. Wiring harness is plenty long. I think it's nice and clean, kind of up and out of the way. Now let's get some lines ran. According to the Grimspeed instructions, port 3 is gonna go to the compressor housing. Port 2 is gonna go to the side port on the wastegate, and then port 1 is going to vent to atmosphere, and the top port on the wastegate is going to vent to atmosphere. That could change when we go to tune the car, depending on what the tuner wants. If we need to connect port 1 to the top of the wastegate, not a big deal. So this is as far as we can get today on the engine bay. Can't really do anything else until we get that fuel line kit in. So basically how it's going to be set up is -6 to the rails. And for our power goals, there's no sense in running new lines from the tank up to here. The line kit that we bought should connect right to these lines here. Should be a fairly easy install whenever those things show up. I'm going to go ahead and call that a wrap right here, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's video. The DW injectors, DW rails, and anything else that we installed on the car today, the AOS and the EBCS. I'll have all that stuff linked down below. Thank you guys for watching. Peace out. I'll see you tomorrow.